Again, a welcome today as we have a lot of things to celebrate today, as we frequently do. As we just sang, "Take my hand and follow me," is really a paraphrase of exactly what we just heard in today's gospel. Each of us, through our baptism, called to be a person of good news in the world in which we live, to be committed to a community of faith that's willing to make a change for the world. I thank Leslie today for leading us in a wonderful direction as we celebrate Pride this weekend. And remember our history as a faith community here and welcoming, not only LGBTQ community, but really a light in a window for every man, woman, and child. That's at the very essence of our gospel today. The passage of Matthew's gospel that we hear today includes the only time that Matthew uses the word apostle, which translates the sent one, as a way to describe what it means to follow Jesus. The more commonly understood definition, and we use this term more frequently, is that of disciple, which translates more accurately a learner. And each of us indeed are called to be disciples, to be apostles. And we have the ample opportunity to learn something new every single day. Today's gospel asks us to consider what it means for us to be sent into our world, to be called to be Christ's presence in our church as well as in our world. That's a challenge, and it always has been. We live in a world that's politically most often upside down and creates an incredible amount of anxiety if we just look at U.S. politics alone. Day in and day out, the bantering, the half-truths that go on. Politically, it's a world upside down. We're called to bring about good in our own faith community. And oftentimes, as we saw in Matthew's gospel today, that experience of how we miss hearing the honesty and what we need to hear from church leaders. And how so often over the years then one doesn't even necessarily dial in to hear, because one oftentimes expects a negative or an unwelcoming message. So to be called to be an agent of change in our world and in our faith community is truly a challenge. It's a world upside down, no matter where you turn. We heard in today's gospel, at the sight of the crowds, Jesus' heart was moved with pity for them because they were troubled and abandoned. How many of us on just a church level can attest to that feeling? Where's that message of unconditional love within our leaders? Why can we not reliably look to that message and build on that message? And so today in the gospel, Jesus then summoned his 12 and sent them into the same world of chaos and injustice, and reminded them, without cost you have received, without cost you are to give. We all live a servant model of priesthood, what it is to be of service to one another, and in particular to our brothers and sisters in need. We all share in the priesthood of Jesus Christ, sometimes referred to as a royal priesthood. I'm not sure exactly what that means. What it doesn't mean is a royal priesthood set apart from the lives of the men, women, and children for whom it is called to serve. The servant model is the model that we are called to. So one has to seriously consider the story that we just heard, the 12 individuals that were chosen by Jesus. One can't help but see a bit of a comparison to the 1967 movie entitled The Dirty Dozen. So think about that for a moment. The calling of the apostles and how it compares to the Dirty Dozen movie. They were all in that movie a bit misfits, and that's exactly why they were chosen. Their mission, and they had no choice but to accept it, was to overturn the Nazi reign. They had a big job, and they were a bunch of interesting men, hence the name The Dirty Dozen. So, in the same vein, we have to take a look at the apostles, the 12, the Dirty Dozen that were called. So we have two sets of brothers that were called, and all of their family dynamics that would entail. Think of two brothers and all their families and all the issues that they would bring to that. Then we have a tax collector, all due respect to people who work in the tax world. Then we have a hot-headed revolutionary zealot. Then we have the one who ultimately felt a need to betray Jesus, because Jesus, in Judas's mind, Jesus had betrayed him by not being the revolutionary that he wanted and needed. Then you have all the rest of the Dirty Dozen who could and did cave into their own fears in regard to even admitting that they knew Jesus. Hence, that's our initial Dirty Dozen, the apostles. In my opinion, if that was the A-team, quite literally, God help us for 2,000 years. Is it any wonder? One could speculate if there was or is hope for our church today and into the future. We are always in need of reimagining ourselves as how to be church in an ever-changing and complex world. As flawed as the original calling forth of the apostles, we are still to this very day searching for ways to be not only hopeful, but to be effective in making a change for good in our world. There is no denying that the churches in North America and Europe have not been able to provide clergy to serve the needs of all the Christian faithful. There's a need to hold the line on ordination more than there is a need to meet the needs and to be creative by reaching out to all of the faithful. We know the challenges within even our own local archdiocese. Several weeks ago, with great pomp and circumstance and great enthusiasm, and rightfully so, the archdiocese recently ordained and welcomed 4 young men to serve as ordained ministers within the church. They were reminded on that day, and I quote, "Jesus is taking you and making you his instruments, his priestly ministers to grow the church." Today I offer my support and my congratulations to the 4 young men that were called to priesthood and ordained. I would draw those same words that were addressed to them today, that we also add our own thoughts and our prayers to a further reaching out of what ministry can mean in the church. As we celebrate the ordination of those 4, we also strive to be led by the Spirit and open ourselves to all the possibilities. It would be my fervent thought, my hope, and my prayer that again that we would have the same level of enthusiasm and support as was shown to those 4 young men, for that we would have that same level of support for restoring the diaconate to the women in our faith community who are clearly called to serve. It is way past time to reimagine who we are as a church. And as rightfully and as good as it is to support the 4 that were ordained, those same words, Jesus is taking you and making you his instruments, his priestly ministers to grow the church, not only applies to the women diaconate, but it applies to each and every one of us, that we are all called to be ministers. As we heard in our first reading from the book of Exodus, if you hearken to my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. All men, women, and children, we are a royal priesthood. We are a servant-based priesthood. We are the people of God. As long as there are Christian faithful, there will be a reason to be hopeful. And we need to be able to embrace that hope. The Christian faithful are called to embrace their responsibilities as belonging to a kingdom of priests with a new commitment, a renewed determination, and a sense of enthusiasm. Together, we have all shared a shared call and responsibility to be a strong moral force within the world, as well as in our church. We are called to seek justice, reconciliation, and to celebrate diversity. So when we consider the original 12 apostles, the challenge to be church is and has always been a high-stakes test. This thing we call organized religion has a lot of challenges. It can go awry frequently. I share these words from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel. They're hard words to hear. I don't disagree. He shares that religion declines not because it was refuted, but because it became irrelevant. It became dull, oppressive, insipid. When faith is completely replaced by creed, worship by discipline, love by habit, when the crisis of today is ignored because of the splendor of the past, when faith becomes an heirloom rather than a living fountain, when religion speaks only in the name of authority rather than the voice of compassion, its message becomes meaningless. It's hard to hear, but it's true. During this month of Pride, I'm reminded that God most definitely has a dream. I am convinced that God's dreams are fundamentally freedom dreams. Dreams not intended just for one people, but for all people. If we are to create space for God's freedom dreams in our world, as well as our church, then it is imperative that we learn from the collective wisdom of all those who have gone before us, and again provide compelling witness. There is a liberating way of living in the world, a liberating way of being church once we finally realize we are the church. There is the possibility of living a fundamentally unchained life, to be alive with God's life and in God's world. The priesthood of all believers is a liberating spirituality that calls all of us to be involved in shared ministry. We have the liberating Jesus as the pioneer of our source and the source of our faith. May we be more willing to be in good trouble and to work for justice without condition. It's a high-stakes situation for all of us. We can still shake our sticks and rattle our chains at the difficult, disheartening messages that surround us in the world as well as our church. On this Pride weekend, we celebrate the good news of who this community chose to be years ago, to celebrate diversity. We didn't come up with this in the last couple of years. This sense of a light in a window and a door open and celebrating diversity is in the foundation of who we are. As long as there are faithful Christians, there will always be hope. That's you and me. And as stinkomatic as sometimes the news is around us, it's okay to let that go. Focus on what gives us hope. Focus on what will make change. Happy Pride.